of the editorial drawing. Please give us your take on this.
Well, part of the drawing, too, is to do with primitive man hunting for his necessities. And, of course, it's also to do with evolution as well, coming from the primitive, from tribal, into global society. So from differences all coming together as one, under one system of domination.
We have the wild humans being taken under the control. Go ahead.
And you also have this elite themselves who do believe in evolution. They believe that they are the most evolved type of humans on the planet. And it's been written about by Wells and the Fabian Society and many, many others down through the last 100-odd years or more. They believe that they have the right to rule mankind because they've proven their worth by the accumulation of vast amounts of wealth, power over the public, control over the public, and they've held on to it through generations. In other words, they haven't squandered it away through bad breeding, as they call it. They have selective breeding, especially picked wives for them to breed with. And they've been doing this for at least a couple of 100 years, as far as we know, as far as the inbreeding goes, in documents that they have put out themselves. Probably much, much longer. But they do believe they're evolved, and therefore they're simply taking their natural right, which is to dominate the planet. They say themselves, and we find in the writings of Charles Galton Darwin, who was one of them. He was the descendant of very inbred people, but they were all bred to be special scientists, and he hints at that in his own writings of the different types that were already bred to dominate the world. But he said that the dominant minority who will rule and own the world must not have their ability for self-preservation taken away, as the masses will have. The masses won't need self-preservation because the state will be making all the decisions for them. But he says, we, the elites, must retain our wild instincts. In other words, the laws will not apply to them. Any kind of law will not apply. That's why there's so many deviants.
We saw that in Rome, where the elite families and the Caesar could murder, kill, rape, steal, take anybody's daughter they wanted.
Yes.
They could force the lower Romans to give their daughters at age 12 into the temples, which were the prostitution centers. And we see the Romans training them that people being beat up and killed was entertainment, was fun, to dehumanize the public. And now we see Burger King. I did confirm what a listener told me a few days ago, with the new slogan, as if anybody else matters. And that speaks to the subconscious, to the id, the animal. Go ahead and hurt yourself. Go ahead and eat the MSG and aspartame, with a subconscious mirror of that they're really hurting the rest of the public and greedily only helping themselves.
That's right. So we've had this global system running. We know for hundreds of years, in reality, there never was democracy in Britain. Although it proclaimed it all the time they had a democracy, they never ever had that, because the British elite watched the French Revolution very, very carefully. And they knew that this was a movement that was going to keep going and pop up again and again, this drive for democracy, where people wanted a say in their life and their lifestyles. Therefore, they decided to give the public a fake, a front. And it's worked very, very well. Margaret Thatcher, in one of her speeches, said that we are part of the parallel government that's unelected by the public. She said she was a member. She was simply, again, reiterating what Carroll Quigley said, Professor Carroll Quigley, when he also mentioned this parallel government. So they've been at it for a long, long time. The idea was to unite the world and unite many different tribes and peoples, cultures, through conflict. And therefore, the fastest way to do it was to create oppositions. They took over a good chunk of Europe and Siberia by the Soviet system. That standardized a massive chunk of it. They used the same technique in the Far East under the guise of communism, and now they call them democratic countries. But what they did was standardize one system copied from the British exoteric system into their system, and you have a standardized world now. Now it's time to bring it all together. Now that we're all have the same education systems, we're taught the same nonsense in school, we're all taught the same fake facts and histories and so on. So now they can standardize us quite simply and easily. And the front organization for this is the United Nations. When you look at the foundations, and that's how the parallel government operated, was the creation of foundations with masses of money to fund their NGOs. The Soviet system was run by NGOs. The leaders were picked by the Politburo. We now have them picked by the parallel government.
And the U.S. and British governments, allied foundations, openly ran the Soviet Union. So if you want to know what the future is, you only need to read what the foundations are saying. Why don't you tell folks what the foundation's main goals are, where we are in the world system, how deep we're actually into it, and what you think we're going to see with the economy unfold. And we're going to go to calls in the next few years, Alan.
Well, what they've said already is that the system they will bring in has to wean us away from our selfish need for self-preservation and accumulation of personal wealth, regardless of the class you're born into.
So that's getting rid of our instinct to become independent, take care of ourselves in the hierarchy of needs, saying it's selfish to have a self-preservation mode. That's what all this environmentalism that's fake is about, is to make us feel bad about being humans so they can train us on loving our servitude, loving our feudal serfdom.
Well, that's right. And it's also part of the British system of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which runs the Council on Foreign Relations. And they have said that the world we bring in is one of servitude to the world state. Servitude to the world state. And they will decide from the top what servitude means. It means giving your whole life, your whole activity, your energy, your very thoughts to the world state. It's based on the doctrine of Plato.
And who can have children? Eugenics, yes.
Yeah, Plato was a member of the ancient societies. He studied in Egypt. He was initiated in Egypt, the Palestine area, and then India. That was the standard route they went on. He wrote about it himself. And then he said in the book called Republic, the one that H.G. Wells said was his Bible, Plato said, what's the problem about owning all this money and having castles? He says, you're afraid of being robbed by the people. You're afraid you have to pay all your servants, etc. Isn't it far better that the people, under the guise that you're ruling them on their behalf, they build the castle for you, they supply its maintenance, they pay for the servants, they pay for anything that's stolen, they'll replace it for you. That's what we have today. This new system with its higher level of, and they'll still call themselves servants, the Kissinger types will live in their massive palaces, chauffeur-driven, etc., and still pretend they're part of you, the same as you. This was the Soviet system.
At every new crisis they create, they will always be the saviors for the next solution, which is even deeper into dehumanization and degradation. Here's an example. About a year ago, I have some employees, so the Texas Workforce Commission sent me a filing in the mail, and it said, you now have to answer these hundreds of questions every year. This is a North American Union survey. And I went on my show, I went on the web, I put it on the website, Infowars.com, and people commented that it wasn't real and it was fake. Now I have an image up on screen of Kroger's. And it says product of U.S., Mexico, and Canada, or product of U.S., Canada, and Mexico. So everything's converting over to this. As you know, they started a year and a half ago. It's in my film Endgame, Blueprint for Global Enslavement, merging the European Union and the North American Union. Bush goes to the Rose Garden with Merkel and Barroso, announces it, but then anybody that talks about it is called a kook by Rush Limbaugh. So how do you see this conversion happening into the next year as they parallel continue to say it doesn't exist, while on the other side they say it does exist and is happening? I mean, how do you see the mind slaves out there who've been conditioned that this doesn't exist? I guess the conditioning is just meant to neutralize them long enough so they debate whether it exists or not until it's too late and already in place?
Yes, most folk are never really in a conscious reality at any time. Most of the people who are brainwashed, and that's the majority of the public, who get their reality from television. Television is so surrealistic, you cannot possibly retain your sanity and your cognitive thinking abilities and reasoning powers and watch it and enjoy it at the same time. You can't have both. It's meant to put you into a strange state where gradually, through osmosis almost, you come to accept new facts without ever consciously thinking through those facts. You adopt them, and you're upgraded like a computer program each time you look into it. and here's a bunch of new facts, and you'll parrot them too, and you won't even remember you had different facts that you parroted yesterday. That's already in society. That's how most folk are working today.
And that's what Orwell talked about, where it didn't matter if they said we're always at war with East Asia, and the next day we were never at war with East Asia. In Big Brother's world, they had to go back and destroy all the old newspapers and TV programs. Here, they just run it all parallel and say, I mean, they've skipped to the final phase where Winston's on the gurney being tortured, and he says, do I have 4 fingers, 2 fingers, 5 fingers, 10 fingers? And he says, look, just tell me how many fingers to see. And he said, no. What I want you to do is see all fingers at once and not be able to differentiate and just lay there like a jellyfish. And he goes, oh, now I see. I love Big Brother. And O'Brien says, now you understand. We're here to tear you apart and dominate you. We are the priest of power, survival of the fittest. This is about crushing humanity and even ourselves and reducing the language down to nothing. And we see they've now done that.
They have done it. There are people who are halfway waking up, and it's like Winston on the table again, and he says, I'm really trying to see 4. And O'Brien says, that's not good enough. You've got to really believe it. And so they're in a quagmire, really, of conflicting facts, because fear works in most people. People are afraid.